Amid the first snow of winter, an elderly couple walked into a quiet gas station. In the woman's arms was a trembling German Shepherd puppy, not to buy food, not to ask for shelter, but to find someone willing to take the little dog away. The woman's eyes were red from crying while the old man beside her stood stiff and silent, like a soldier using pride to keep himself from falling apart in public. Near the coffee machines, a Navy SEAL on leave watched everything in silence, his retired military dog standing rigid at his side. Why would two people who clearly loved that puppy want to give him up in the middle of a snowstorm? And why did the little dog tremble every time the old man took one step closer? Subscribe and stay with us until the end, because what happened next may remind you that God sometimes sends miracles on 4 paws. The first snow of winter drifted over the outskirts of Asheville, North Carolina, turning the highway pale and lonely beneath a heavy gray sky. Miller's Fuel and Market sat beside the road like a tired lantern, its windows fogged by old heat and cheap coffee, its neon sign buzzing weakly against the cold. Inside, Emily Harris was wiping the counter for the 3rd time, though it was already clean. She was 24, slim and small-boned, with warm brown skin, dark curls tied loosely beneath a navy knit cap, and watchful hazel eyes that noticed too much for someone paid too little. Most people thought Emily was quiet. In truth, she had learned early that silence was safer than asking questions. Her mother had raised her alone after her father vanished when she was 11, and since then Emily had developed the habit of reading people the way other people read weather. That was why she looked up immediately when the automatic doors opened and an elderly woman stepped in holding a German Shepherd puppy against her chest. The woman was Margaret Parker, though Emily did not know her name yet. She looked to be in her early 70s, short and delicate, with a soft round face, pale skin touched by winter redness, and silver hair pinned badly beneath a faded wool hat. She wore a long brown coat that had clearly survived more winters than fashion trends, and her hands trembled around the puppy not from weakness alone, but from the terrible effort of not crying. The puppy she carried was about 12 weeks old, black and tan, with oversized paws, half-raised ears, bright amber eyes, and a new red collar with a tiny silver tag. His name was Buddy. He was clean, brushed, and clearly loved, the kind of puppy that smelled faintly of warm blankets and milk biscuits, not neglect. Yet he pressed himself into Margaret's chest as if the whole world had become too loud. Behind Margaret came William Parker. He was 76, tall despite the bend age had carved into his back, broad-shouldered beneath a charcoal winter coat, with a square jaw, pale blue eyes, and a face cut by deep lines that made him look less like an old man than a mountain after a storm. Gray stubble shadowed his chin. His hands remained gloved. He moved with the rigid caution of a man who had once been trained never to waste motion, and the old military bearing still clung to him like frost on a fence rail. But there was something else beneath it. Shame. Sharpened into pride until no one could touch it without bleeding. Emily straightened. "Can I help you folks?" Margaret opened her mouth, but the words seemed to break apart before leaving her. She looked down at Buddy, kissed the top of his head, then tried again. "We were wondering if you might know anyone who would want a puppy." The question landed strangely in the small store. Outside, wind dragged snow across the gas pumps. Inside, the coffee machine hissed like it had heard something private. Emily glanced at Buddy's shiny collar, his clean coat, the careful way Margaret held him. "You're giving him away?" William answered before Margaret could. "Yes." His voice was low and rough, not angry, but final. Buddy flinched at the sound. It was small, just a tightening of his little body, a quick turn of his muzzle into Margaret's sleeve, but Emily saw it. Margaret saw it too. William saw it last, and something passed across his face so quickly most people would have missed it. Not irritation, pain. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret whispered to the puppy. "It's all right." But Buddy kept trembling. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had seen abandoned animals before, This was not that. People abandoning animals usually explained too much. Allergies, moving, landlord problems, too many excuses stacked like boxes. But these two brought silence. The woman looked heartbroken. The man looked like he would rather walk barefoot through glass than admit why. Margaret slowly set a few items on the counter: bread, eggs, a small bottle of aspirin, and 2 cans of puppy food. Then, after checking the bills in her purse, she quietly took the cans back and held them against her coat. Emily softened her voice. "Ma'am, you don't have to put those back." William stepped forward. "We pay for what we take." Buddy shook harder. Margaret closed her eyes. "Frank." She stopped herself as though even using an old nickname had become dangerous in public. The automatic doors slid open again, and a blast of snow swept across the floor. A man in his late 30s entered. Tall and athletic, with light skin, short, dark blonde hair cut close in military style, calm gray-blue eyes, and a faint scar along his chin. Ryan Walker wore a dark jacket over a Navy uniform, and though he moved quietly, he carried the unmistakable stillness of someone who knew violence but preferred peace. At his side walked Ranger, an 8-year-old retired military German shepherd, large and sable-coated, with gray around his muzzle, a torn notch in one ear, and intelligent amber eyes that missed nothing. Ranger stopped the moment he saw Buddy. The old dog's ears rose. His body shifted, not with aggression, but with certainty. He stepped forward, placed himself between Buddy and William, and stood there like a silent wall. No one spoke. William stared at Ranger, then at Ryan's uniform, and the blood seemed to drain from his weathered face. Margaret clutched Buddy closer. Emily forgot the register, the coffee, even the snow outside. For one frozen second, the little gas station felt less like a store and more like a battlefield where no one had yet admitted there had been a war. Ryan Walker did not judge William Parker in that first frozen second. Judgment was easy. Any fool with warm boots and a full wallet could stand beneath fluorescent lights and decide what another man should have done. Ryan had learned better. He had seen brave men become cruel when fear cornered them. He had seen gentle men speak like stone because softness had once cost them too much. So he stayed where he was, one hand loose on Ranger's leash, watching the old man without pity and without challenge. Ranger remained between William and Buddy, silent as an old oath. Buddy trembled in Margaret's arms, his small body pressed so tightly against her coat that his red collar nearly disappeared in the folds of worn brown wool. Margaret lowered her cheek to the puppy's head, whispering something too soft for anyone to catch. Maybe comfort, maybe apology, maybe both. William stared at the dog blocking him, then at Ryan, then away. That last part mattered. Men who meant harm usually hated being stopped. William looked wounded by it, as if the dog had not accused his hands, but remembered something his own heart had spent years trying to bury. Emily Harris stood behind the counter, no longer pretending this was an ordinary winter afternoon. The coffee machine hissed beside her. A lottery ticket display clicked faintly in the draft from the door. Outside, snow scraped across the gas pumps in thin white ribbons, but inside the small store the cold had become human. "Ranger," Ryan said quietly. The old shepherd's ears moved, but he did not step aside. Ryan did not force him. "He's not usually wrong about people," Ryan added, his voice calm. William's jaw tightened. "Dogs are wrong all the time." Buddy flinched at the roughness of the words, and William saw it happen. His shoulders stiffened, not with anger, but with the helplessness of a man watching himself become the thing he feared. Margaret closed her eyes. "Frank," she whispered, and that name softened the air for half a breath. Not William. Frank, a husband's name, a kitchen table name, a name from before Winter had learned where they lived. William looked down at her, and for one brief instant the iron in his face gave way. Emily caught it. Ryan did too. That was the problem with broken men, Ryan thought. People mistook their armor for their soul. Margaret shifted Buddy higher in her arms and tried to smile at Emily. We don't want trouble. We just thought someone kind might take him." Her voice cracked on the last word. "He's a good boy. He sleeps through most nights now. He likes toast crusts, though I know he shouldn't have too many. And he doesn't chew shoes if you give him a towel instead." She was talking too quickly now, selling the puppy like a woman giving away her own heartbeat and hoping a good list of habits might keep it alive in someone else's house. Emily's eyes moved to the counter. Bread, eggs, aspirin, 1 cheap pack of batteries, 3 small cans of puppy food. Then she saw Margaret's purse open, saw the folded bills inside, saw the old woman count without moving her lips. Margaret noticed Emily noticing. Shame rose in her face before she gently set 2 cans of puppy food aside. "I grabbed too much," she said. Emily stepped forward. "No, you didn't. I can cover those." William's answer came like a door shutting. "No." It was not loud. It did not need to be. Margaret shrank slightly, then hated herself for it. That much was written in the way she lifted her chin afterward. William hated himself, too. That was written in the way he looked at the floor. Ryan had seen this kind of pride before. Pride that had once kept a man alive. Pride that had later become a locked room with no windows. "It's just a few cans," Emily said gently. "It's not charity." William gave a dry laugh, but there was no humor in it. "People always rename charity before handing it over." Emily's face flushed, not from insult, but from the strange sadness of being refused when she meant only warmth. Ryan took a slow breath. "Nobody here is trying to shame you." William turned toward him then, pale eyes sharp beneath the store lights. "You don't know what shame is, son." Ryan held the look. "I know enough." The silence that followed was careful and dangerous. Ranger stood still, as if he were guarding not Buddy now, but the thin line between 2 wars neither man wanted to name. Margaret touched William's sleeve. "Please," she said. Just 1 word, but it carried years inside it. William's anger broke apart before it could rise. He looked at Buddy again. The puppy peeked from Margaret's arms, curious for 1 second, then tucked himself away when William moved even a little. That small retreat struck the old man visibly. His gloved hand lifted, stopped in the air, and fell back to his side. "He didn't used to do that," Margaret said, almost to herself. William's face hardened because it was the only way he knew to keep from falling. He learned. Ryan heard the confession beneath the bitterness. Not that William had hurt Buddy on purpose. Something worse, perhaps. That fear had leaked out of him and taught the puppy what the house already knew. Emily came around the counter slowly. "Did something happen at home?" Margaret drew in a shaky breath. "Nothing we can explain in a gas station." She looked toward William, and for a moment her eyes filled with a loyalty so tired it seemed holy. "Frank has bad nights." William looked away. Ryan understood then. Not all of it, but enough. Nightmares, sudden voices, hands reaching for old weapons that were no longer there. A frightened puppy learning that thunder could come from a man's throat. A wife cleaning up after both the living and the dead. William spoke before anyone could pity him. "We're old, the house is cold. She can't keep chasing after him and I—" He stopped. The unfinished sentence hung there, heavier than the snow outside. "I cannot trust myself. I cannot protect what I love. I cannot bear one more thing needing me." Margaret shook her head. "That isn't true." "It is true enough." His voice dropped lower. "Truth doesn't have to be complete to still ruin you." Ryan looked at Buddy, then at the food cans on the counter. "Is this about money?" William's eyes flashed. "Everything is about money when you don't have any." Margaret pressed her lips together, embarrassed but too exhausted to deny it. "The heat bill came early," she said, "and medicine went up again." She tried to laugh and failed. Apparently, even pain costs more in winter. Emily swallowed hard. "You could keep him. People help with things like this." William's expression turned bleak. Help runs out, attachment doesn't. Ryan had no answer for that. He thought of men he had carried, names he still heard in sleep, promises made under foreign stars and broken by morning. He thought of Ranger growing older beside him, gray slowly gathering around the muzzle, loyalty aging faster than he was ready to accept. Maybe William was not refusing love because he felt nothing. Maybe he was refusing it because he felt too much. Ryan crouched a little, not toward William, but toward Buddy. The puppy watched him with uncertain amber eyes. Ranger finally glanced back, approving or warning. With Ranger, it was often both. "What's his name?" Ryan asked. Margaret's face crumpled softly. "Buddy." The name came out like a prayer. William closed his eyes. For a moment he looked every one of his 76 years, and several that did not belong to time at all. Ryan stood again. Why give him away today? The question was quiet, but it struck the center of the room. Margaret's arms tightened around Buddy. Emily stopped breathing for a second. William stared past them all through the glass doors toward the white highway disappearing into the darkening afternoon. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its edge. What remained was worse. "Because he's young." Ryan waited. William's mouth trembled once before he forced it still. "Young enough to forget our faces." Margaret made a small sound and buried it in Buddy's fur. Emily looked down quickly, blinking hard. Ryan said nothing. Ranger did not move. Buddy, as if he understood only the ache and not the words, lifted his small head and looked at William. For one fragile second, he did not tremble. William saw it, and the old soldier's face broke open just enough to reveal the grief beneath. Then the puppy tucked himself back into Margaret's arms, and the moment vanished. Outside, the snow thickened over Asheville's empty road. Inside Miller's Fuel and Market, no one had solved anything. But the truth had stepped into the room at last, quiet and wounded, wearing an old man's coat. The snow had thickened by the time William Parker carried Buddy back through the automatic doors, and for a moment the little German shepherd looked over Margaret's shoulder as if the warm gas station had been a country he was being exiled from. Emily stood behind the counter with both hands pressed flat against the laminate, watching the old couple step into the white dusk. She wanted to call after them. She wanted to say that pride was a foolish coat in weather like this, thin at the elbows and full of holes. But William's back, stiff beneath his charcoal coat, warned her that some men could survive hunger more easily than mercy. Margaret paused once near the door. Buddy tucked close under her chin and gave Emily a small smile that seemed stitched together with apology. Then the wind swallowed them. Ryan remained inside for several seconds after they left, staring through the glass as William helped Margaret into an old green pickup crusted with road salt. The truck coughed twice before starting. Ranger stood beside Ryan's leg, ears forward, his body restless in that silent way that meant he had already made a decision and was waiting for the human to catch up. "I know," Ryan murmured, though he did not yet know what he meant. He paid for his coffee, added the 2 cans of puppy food Margaret had put back, and left them on the counter. Emily noticed, but said nothing. Her eyes, usually guarded, were wet now. "They live out toward Blue Ridge Hollow," she said quietly. "At least, I think they do. Mrs. Parker comes in sometimes when the weather gets bad." Ryan looked at her. "You know them?" "No, not really. She always buys peppermint candy and apologizes if the card reader is slow." Emily tried to smile and failed. People like that don't ask for help until the roof is already gone. Ryan nodded once, took the cans, and stepped into the snow. He did not tell himself he was following them because of Buddy. That would have been too simple. He followed because William's last sentence had stayed behind in the store like a ghost. "Young enough to forget our faces." Men did not say things like that unless they had already imagined disappearing. The old pickup's taillights glowed ahead through the storm, 2 red wounds moving along the narrow road. Ryan kept several car lengths behind, headlights dimmed, with Ranger sitting upright beside him, watching the road as if it too might turn hostile. Asheville faded behind them. First the last fast food sign, then the gas station glow, then the scattered houses with porch lights and Christmas wreaths. The land rose gradually toward the Blue Ridge, where winter gathered more deeply among black trees and empty fields. Snow pressed against the windshield in wet bursts. The wipers dragged it aside with a tired groan. Ryan's hands stayed steady on the wheel, but inside him old instincts were waking. Assess distance, count turns, read terrain, listen for the thing that did not belong. Only there was no battlefield here, no enemy wire, no radio chatter, just an old couple, a frightened puppy, and a kind of poverty that had learned to keep quiet. The pickup finally turned down a rutted lane beneath bare oak branches. Ryan slowed before the bend and killed his headlights. Through the trees he saw the Parker house, an old wooden cabin leaning slightly into the hill, its porch sagging under the weight of snow, its roof patched with mismatched shingles, its windows dark except for one weak amber flicker. It looked less abandoned than exhausted, as if it had been holding its breath for years. No smoke rose from the chimney. No porch lamp burned. A blue tarp covered one side wall where winter had chewed through the boards. William got out first, moving slowly but refusing to show it. Margaret climbed down with Buddy inside her coat, shielding him from the wind with her own body. William carried the grocery bag in one hand and a dented toolbox in the other, though the toolbox looked too heavy for his stiff fingers. Ryan sat in the truck long enough to hate himself for watching. This was not his business. That was what decent strangers told themselves before driving away. Ranger made a low sound in his throat. "Yeah," Ryan whispered. "That's what I thought." He waited until the Parkers went inside, then approached on foot, boots sinking into fresh snow. The closer he got, the colder the house seemed. Not just winter cold, but the cold of rooms where heat had become a negotiation. Through a narrow gap in the curtain, he saw Margaret kneeling beside an open dresser drawer placed near the kitchen wall. She had lined it with towels, an old flannel shirt, and what looked like part of a quilt. Buddy sat inside it, ears half lifted, watching her with solemn, puppy confusion. Margaret tucked the cloth around him as if preparing a prince for sleep. "There now," she whispered, her voice carrying faintly through the old wood and glass. "That's better, sweetheart. We'll get you warm." Behind her, the kitchen was painfully bare. A refrigerator stood with photographs and old magnets on the door, but when Margaret opened it, the inside light flickered over almost nothing. Half a jar of mustard, a small carton of milk, and a plate covered in foil. The cupboards had the hollow look of places opened too often by people hoping contents might multiply out of kindness. William knelt near a battered space heater, the kind with a dented metal grill and a stubborn pilot light. He had taken off one glove now. Ryan could see his hand trembling, the knuckles swollen from arthritis, the fingers scarred and bent slightly wrong. William struck a match. The flame shook. He tried to feed it into the heater. Nothing. He tried again. Nothing. On the third attempt, the match burned too close to his fingertips and he cursed under his breath, sharp enough that Buddy shrank down into the drawer. William froze. Margaret turned but did not scold him. That mercy hurt more than anger would have. "It's all right," she said gently, though whether to Buddy or William, Ryan could not tell. William set the matchbox down, breathing hard, staring at the useless heater as if it were an enemy he no longer had the strength to defeat. Then he shoved it away with one bitter motion and sat back on his heels. For a moment he looked smaller than he had at the gas station. Not weak. Never that. Just outnumbered by age, weather, bills, memory, and one tiny dog who had learned to fear sudden sounds. Ryan stepped back from the window, ashamed of how much he had seen, but the wind hit him poorly. William's head snapped toward the glass. Even old, even tired, the man's instincts were still alive. Ryan moved into the shadow beside the porch post and waited. Several seconds passed. Inside, William stared toward the window, eyes narrowed. Margaret touched his shoulder. "Frank?" He looked away at last. Ryan exhaled slowly. He should leave, he told himself. Instead, he placed the 2 cans of puppy food near the porch steps where they would be found in the morning without a conversation attached. Then he returned to his truck and stayed. Hours passed. Snow softened the cabin roof and buried the lane behind him. The amber flicker inside faded to candlelight. Ranger slept lightly, never fully surrendering his ears to rest. Near midnight, a crash split the silence. Ryan was out of the truck before thought caught up with him. From inside the cabin came William's voice, not old now, but raw, young, terrified. "Don't pull me up. Don't put me on that bird." Another crash followed, metal against wood. Buddy yelped in panic. Ryan reached the porch and looked through the same narrow gap. William stood in the kitchen in a gray undershirt, eyes wide and empty, one hand clawing at the air as if gripping a world only he could see. A chair lay overturned near him. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cold. Buddy had fled beneath the table, trembling so hard the chair legs rattled faintly. Margaret, wrapped in a quilt, rose slowly from beside the stove. She did not rush. She did not cry out. She approached him the way one approaches a wounded animal and a beloved husband at once. "Frank," she said softly. He flinched as if struck. She reached for his wrist, careful, patient, brave in the small domestic way no metal had ever honored. "You're home." William's breathing tore through the room. "Don't leave me there," he whispered, and the words seemed to come from some buried trench inside him. Margaret held his wrist with both hands. "You're home," she repeated. "You're with me. The snow is outside. The war is not." Slowly, horribly slowly, William's eyes found her. Recognition returned like a lantern being lit in a cave. His shoulders sagged. Buddy remained hidden beneath the table, but his crying quieted. Ryan stood outside in the snow, unable to move. The man who had frightened the puppy was not a monster. He was a battlefield that had followed an old soldier home, and poor Buddy had been sleeping too close to the thunder. Morning came pale and brittle over Blue Ridge Hollow, and the snow on the Parker cabin roof shone with the cold innocence of something that had never known hunger. Ryan did not knock until the sun was fully up. He had spent the last hours in his truck with Ranger sleeping lightly beside him, thinking about the crash and the night, William's terrified voice, Margaret's hand around her husband's wrist, and Buddy hiding beneath the table like a small heart trying not to beat too loudly. When he finally stepped onto the porch, he carried a paper bag of breakfast biscuits, a tool kit, and the kind of careful expression men wear when they know they are about to cross the border between concern and intrusion. Margaret opened the door before he knocked twice. She looked smaller in daylight, wrapped in the same old cardigan, her silver hair pinned loosely, her eyes shadowed by a night without sleep. Yet she smiled as if kindness were a habit she refused to lose. "Mr. Walker," she said, surprised but not displeased. "Ryan," he corrected gently. Behind her, Buddy stood inside the kitchen doorway, watching him with soft uncertainty. William sat at the table with a mug of black coffee between his hands, his face unreadable. "You lost?" he asked. Ryan lifted the toolkit. Heater looked like it needed a second opinion. William's jaw moved once. "Didn't ask for one." "No," Ryan said. "You didn't." That should have ended it. Instead, Margaret stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze both your ears off. Frank, don't start a war before breakfast." William muttered something into his coffee, but he did not tell Ryan to leave. That was the first surrender, though no flag was raised. By noon, the cabin had changed in small ways. Emily arrived in a red hatchback that looked too cheerful for the road it had survived, carrying soup, folded blankets, puppy food, batteries, and a bag of peppermint candies she claimed had been accidentally overstocked at the gas station. She had changed out of her work polo into an oversized gray sweater and worn jeans tucked into snow boots, but she still carried that watchful gentleness, as if she expected the world to bruise easily. "I brought chicken soup," she announced, setting bags on the counter before William could object. And before anybody gets dramatic, the soup was already made. William stared at her. "Do I look dramatic?" Emily glanced at the broken heater, the bare cupboards, and Buddy's drawer bed near the wall. "A little theatrical, maybe." Margaret laughed, truly laughed, and the sound startled everyone, including Buddy, who barked once at the ceiling as though laughter were a suspicious bird. Even William's mouth twitched, though he buried it behind his mug. Ryan spent the afternoon on the heater, coaxing life from old metal, dust, and stubborn screws. His hands moved steadily while Ranger lay by the door and Buddy hovered near Margaret's ankles. The repair was not easy. The heater had been neglected too long, its wiring brittle, its ignition clogged, its casing dented by years of use. But Ryan had fixed worse things in worse places, and by mid-afternoon the machine coughed, rattled, and finally pushed a thin breath of warm air into the room. Margaret pressed both hands to her mouth. Emily clapped once. Buddy leaned forward, sniffed the heater, then sneezed so violently he nearly sat down. William did not thank Ryan. He only looked at the stream of warm air, then at Margaret's face, and something inside him twisted. Gratitude, when mixed with shame, can feel like poison to proud men. The second storm came that evening, not from the sky but from the electric company. Ryan had seen the unpaid notices on the refrigerator the night before, their red print half hidden beneath an old photograph and a magnet shaped like a black bear. He had paid enough on the account to keep service from being disconnected, telling himself it was practical, not personal. The lights steadied just after supper. The refrigerator hummed properly for the first time in days. Margaret froze at the sink. William looked up from the table. "What did you do?" His voice was quiet, which made it worse. Ryan did not lie. Paid part of the bill. The room tightened. Even Buddy stopped chewing the corner of a towel. William stood slowly, both hands flat on the table. "You had no right." Emily opened her mouth, but Margaret lifted one hand, stopping her. Ryan held William's stare. "You needed heat." "I needed to be asked." "Would you have said yes?" "That is not your decision to make." William's face had gone pale, the lines around his mouth deepening into trenches. "You think because you wear that uniform you can walk into a man's house and decide what he can't handle?" Ryan's own temper stirred, but he kept it leashed. "No, I think because your wife was cold." That sentence landed hard. William looked toward Margaret and the anger cracked into something far more dangerous. Humiliation. "Frank," Margaret said softly. He shook his head. "Don't." But she did not stop. For the first time since Ryan had met her, her voice carried iron beneath the velvet. "I am tired of pretending gratitude is weakness." William stared at her as if she had struck him. Margaret stepped closer, one hand resting against the counter to steady herself. "I have spent years watching you turn kindness away like it was a bill collector. I have watched you freeze rather than accept fire from another man's hand, and I loved you through it, Frank. But I am tired." The cabin fell silent. Outside, wind dragged snow against the windows. Buddy left Margaret's side and, for reasons no one understood, sat halfway between her and William, not close enough to touch him, not far enough to flee. William looked down at the puppy. His anger had nowhere left to stand. Later, after Emily warmed the soup and Ryan pretended not to notice William eating 2 bowls, the old photograph on the refrigerator drew Ryan's eye. It showed a young woman standing on the Parker porch in autumn sunlight, laughing with her head tipped back. She had chestnut-brown hair falling in loose waves, fair skin dusted with freckles, and bright green eyes full of mischief. She wore a yellow sweater under denim overalls and held a tiny pumpkin in both hands as if presenting a royal treasure. There was a fearless sweetness about her, the kind often found in people who believed life would give them time to become everything they promised. "That's Lily," Margaret said. Ryan turned. Her smile had changed. It was still tender, but now it carried winter inside. "Our granddaughter." Emily became very still. William pushed his spoon around the bowl and said nothing. Margaret reached for the photograph, touched the edge of it, then let her hand fall. She was 19, studying veterinary nursing at a community college near Boone. She used to bring home every injured thing she found. Birds, cats, once a raccoon Frank swore was plotting tax fraud. Emily laughed softly despite herself. William's eyes stayed on the table, but the corner of his mouth moved at the memory. Margaret continued. Last December, a drunk driver crossed the median outside Marion. Lily and 2 other students were coming home from a shelter event. Her voice thinned, but did not break. The police said it was fast. People say that when they don't know what else to give you. No one spoke. Buddy, as if summoned by a name he had never known, padded to Margaret and pressed his head against her ankle. She bent to stroke him. 3 weeks after the funeral, I saw Buddy's picture online. Last puppy in the litter. Too quiet, they said. Too clingy. I told Frank maybe the house needed something that still needed us. William stood abruptly and carried his bowl to the sink, though it was still half full. I told her it was a mistake. Because you didn't like him? Emily asked carefully. Because I did, William said, too quickly. The truth stunned even him. He gripped the sink edge until his knuckles whitened. Because things you love leave marks when they go, and this house already had enough ghosts. Margaret's eyes filled, but she did not argue. Ryan finally understood the shape of the wound. Buddy had not been brought home to replace Lily. Nothing could. He had been brought home because silence had become too loud. The puppy had been a small candle in a room where grief kept blowing out the lamps. And William, poor stubborn William, had feared the candle because he already knew what darkness cost. That night, after Emily left and the heater breathed uneven warmth into the cabin, Buddy wandered from Margaret's chair toward William. The old man sat near the window, pretending to read an old hunting magazine. Buddy stopped a few feet away, sat down, and watched him. William did not move. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered. Buddy tilted his head. William sighed, the sound rough but not angry. "You're supposed to be scared of me." Buddy blinked, then lay down on the rug, still not touching him, but closer than before. Margaret saw it from across the room and said nothing. Ryan, standing near the door with Ranger, saw it too. No miracle burst through the ceiling, no wound closed. But in the cold cabin at the edge of the woods, one small dog had moved a little nearer to an old soldier, and for that night it was enough. The warmth Ryan had coaxed back into the Parker cabin did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like an old animal limping home, uneven and tired, but alive. For 3 days after the heater started working again, the house seemed almost peaceful. Buddy no longer slept only in the drawer by the kitchen wall. Sometimes he curled near Margaret's chair, sometimes near the stove, and once, to everyone's surprise, he lay down 2 feet from William's boots while the old man pretended not to notice. But peace, like thin ice over deep water, often looks strongest right before it cracks. The first crack came on a Tuesday morning when Margaret opened the refrigerator and found her reading glasses resting beside a carton of milk. She laughed at first, a small embarrassed laugh, and said she must have been half asleep. William did not laugh. He stood by the sink with a dish towel in his hands, staring at the glasses as if they had been placed there by a ghost. The second crack came that afternoon when Emily stopped by with a loaf of bread and found Margaret searching for her medicine. After 10 anxious minutes, Ryan discovered the pill bottle inside the microwave, hidden behind a chipped mug. Margaret pressed both hands to her cheeks and whispered, "Well, that's a new kind of foolish." Emily tried to comfort her, but Margaret looked at the younger woman with sudden tenderness and said, "Lily, would you hand me my sweater?" The room went silent. Emily's face softened with pain, not because she was offended, but because she understood too quickly that she had been mistaken for someone loved and gone. William turned away before anyone could read his expression. Buddy, sensing the strange drop in the air, walked to Margaret and placed one paw on her slipper. Margaret looked down at him and smiled. "At least you know who I am," she murmured. But William heard the fear hiding beneath her humor, and that fear followed him for the rest of the day like a black dog no fire could chase away. By the end of the week, Ryan insisted they visit a clinic in Asheville. William refused to come inside. He drove them there in his old pickup, but when they reached the small brick medical building with frosted windows and a faded wreath on the door, he remained behind the wheel, hands locked around it so tightly the tendons stood out beneath his skin. "I'm not sitting in a room while strangers explain my wife to me," he said. Margaret touched his arm. "Frank." He looked straight ahead. "Go on. I'll wait." Ryan did not argue. Some battles could not be pushed from the outside. He helped Margaret out of the truck, and Buddy, tucked inside a blanket in her lap because she had refused to leave him at home, lifted his head to watch William through the windshield. For a second, the old man looked back at the puppy. Then he looked away first. Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic, coffee, and wet wool coats. Dr. Susan Miller met them in a quiet examination room painted a soft green that tried very hard to be calming. She was in her early 60s, tall and slender, with light brown skin, silver-streaked black hair cut neatly at her jaw, and kind gray eyes that had clearly learned how to deliver hard truths without making them feel like punishment. She wore no jewelry except a plain gold wedding band, and her voice was steady in the way of someone who had spent a lifetime walking families through storms that medicine could name, but not always stop. She spoke to Margaret, not around her, which made Margaret sit a little straighter. The tests began gently. Dates, words to remember, a clock to draw, a short story to repeat. Margaret smiled through the first mistakes, then apologized after the fifth. By the time she called Ryan Frank and then laughed too quickly to cover the confusion, Ryan felt something in his chest grow heavy. Buddy had fallen asleep against Margaret's coat, but whenever her fingers trembled, his ears twitched. Dr. Miller folded her hands when it was over. "Mrs. Parker," she said softly, "I believe you are showing signs of early-stage Alzheimer's disease." The sentence did not explode. It simply entered the room and sat down beside them. Margaret blinked once. "Are you sure?" Dr. Miller's eyes did not leave hers. "We will need more evaluation. But yes, the signs are there." Margaret looked at Buddy, then at her own hands. "I forgot Lily's birthday last month," she whispered. "I remembered 2 days later and cried in the pantry because I didn't want Frank to hear." Ryan had no answer. Dr. Miller reached across the desk, not touching Margaret, just offering nearness. "Forgetting does not mean you loved her less." Margaret nodded, but the nod was thin and breakable. On the ride home, she said almost nothing. Snow moved across the windshield in slow white streaks. Buddy slept in her lap, one paw hooked over her sleeve like an anchor. When the truck pulled into the cabin lane, William was waiting outside despite the cold, his coat unbuttoned, his face already knowing. He opened Margaret's door and helped her down. "Well?" he asked. Margaret tried to smile. "My mind is getting a little untidy." William stared at Ryan over her shoulder. Ryan did not soften it. "Early-stage Alzheimer's." For a moment, William did not move. The woods behind him stood black and silent, and the whole mountain seemed to hold its breath. Then he nodded once, too sharply, as if receiving orders. "All right." But nothing was all right after that. That evening, while Emily warmed soup and Margaret dozed in her chair with Buddy pressed against her side, William stood outside under the porch roof, smoking a cigarette he barely touched. Ryan joined him. "You thinking about giving Buddy away again?" Ryan said. It was not a question. William exhaled smoke into the snow-dark air. "Thinking? Son, I never stopped." His voice was flat, emptied by fear. "She's going to need more help. I can barely keep this place standing. What happens when she forgets the stove? Forgets the door? Forgets him?" Ryan looked through the window at Buddy's head resting on Margaret's knee. "He helps her. For now." William's hand shook. "Everything good is always for now." The next morning, Ryan made the offer he had been dreading. He stood in the kitchen while Margaret sat quietly at the table, Buddy at her feet, and William leaned against the counter with the look of a man waiting for a verdict. "I can take him," Ryan said. "Ranger's good with young dogs. I have space. I can train him. You'd still see him whenever you wanted." Margaret's eyes filled instantly, but she nodded as if kindness required her to bleed politely. William folded his arms. "That's best." The words came too fast, already rehearsed in some private courtroom of his mind. Emily, who had arrived with fresh blankets, looked at him in disbelief. "Best for who?" William did not answer. Ryan clipped a leash to Buddy's red collar. "Come on, boy," he said softly. Buddy took 2 steps, then stopped. His ears rose. He looked at Margaret, then Ryan, then William. Suddenly he turned, darted across the kitchen and sank his small teeth into the canvas strap of William's old duffel bag by the wall. He pulled backward with all the strength in his growing body, growling low, not in anger, but refusal. The bag tipped over. An old navy sweatshirt slid onto the floor. William froze. "Buddy," Ryan said gently. The puppy ignored him. He dragged the strap toward William's boots, then let go and pressed his whole body against the old man's leg. No trembling this time. No retreat. Just the fierce, foolish loyalty of a creature too young to understand death and wise enough to understand need. William stared down at him. His gloved hand hovered, shook, then settled into Buddy's fur. The old soldier's face collapsed silently. He lowered himself into a chair as if his bones had finally surrendered, bowed his head, and cried for the first time in years. Margaret covered her mouth. Emily turned toward the window, wiping her eyes. Ryan unclipped the leash without a word. Buddy stayed exactly where he had chosen to be. Buddy did not leave the Parker cabin that morning, and after Ryan unclipped the leash, no one spoke of taking him away again. The little German shepherd seemed to understand the decision before the humans did. He stayed pressed against William's leg until the old man's quiet crying had passed, then climbed awkwardly onto one of William's boots and sat there with the solemn pride of a knight guarding a fallen king. William wiped his face roughly, angry at his own tears, but he did not push the dog away. That was how it began, not with a speech, not with forgiveness, not with a clean miracle, but with one old soldier allowing one small creature to remain close enough to hear his heart beating. Over the next weeks, winter deepened around Blue Ridge Hollow. Snow gathered along the cabin roof, sealed the narrow lane in white silence, and turned the woods behind the house into a cathedral of bare branches and gray light. Inside, Buddy became William's shadow. He followed him to the porch when William stepped out to check the woodpile. He sat under the kitchen table whenever William drank coffee. At night, when the old nightmares rose like wolves from the dark, Buddy was the first to hear them coming. Once, near 2 in the morning, William woke choking on a memory, his hand striking the wall beside the bed. Before Margaret could sit up, Buddy was already there, paws on the mattress, licking William's wrist with frantic devotion. William's breath came ragged and broken. "Get down," he muttered, but his voice had no strength in it. Buddy stayed. After a long while, William's trembling hand settled on the puppy's back. "Stubborn little fool," he whispered. Buddy wagged his tail once as if accepting the compliment. Margaret, lying beside them in the dim glow of the hallway nightlight, smiled with tears in her eyes. She forgot more things each week now. She forgot where she had put the sugar. She forgot that Emily had already visited that morning. Once, she asked Ryan whether he had seen her school books, and another time she stood in the living room holding a spoon, unable to remember why she had crossed the room. But she remembered Buddy. Always Buddy. His name came easily to her lips even when the day, the month, and sometimes William's last conversation slipped away like footprints under fresh snow. "Buddy needs his breakfast," she would say, though she had fed him 10 minutes earlier. "Buddy likes the blue blanket," she would murmur, folding the same blanket again and again. William never corrected her about the dog. He had learned there were truths too sharp to hand to someone twice. Instead, He filled Buddy's bowl again with a smaller scoop, or placed the blue blanket over Margaret's knees and let Buddy curl beside her as if the whole performance had been necessary. Emily changed that winter, too. One afternoon she arrived at the cabin with flour on her sleeve and a look in her eyes that was half terror, half sunrise. "I quit Miller's," she announced. William looked up from repairing an old hinge. "Finally robbed the place?" Emily rolled her eyes. "No, Frank, I opened a bakery." Margaret clapped softly, delighted. "Oh, Lily always said you baked beautifully." Emily's smile flickered at the name, then steadied. "Then I'll try to deserve that." The bakery sat near the highway in a narrow brick storefront that had once been a bait shop and then, briefly and unsuccessfully, a tax office. Emily painted the walls cream, hung second-hand curtains in the windows, and named it Winter Grace Bakery, because, as she told Ryan, everything good in winter feels borrowed from heaven. William declared the name sentimental nonsense and then arrived on opening morning at exactly 7:10 with Buddy at his side. He bought the cheapest loaf of bread, paid in cash, and complained that the coffee tasted too expensive. Emily handed Buddy a tiny corner of bacon from behind the counter and said, "Good thing nobody asked you to enjoy yourself." By February, William visited almost every morning. He still pretended the stops were practical. Bread was necessary. Coffee was necessary. Checking whether Emily had remembered to salt the sidewalk was, apparently, also necessary. Buddy became famous among the bakery's regulars, especially because he sat beside William like a furry deputy and accepted compliments with the grave dignity of a mayor. Emily never said out loud that William smiled more now. She had learned some miracles scattered, if named too quickly. Ryan came often as well, though at first he told himself he was only helping with repairs, carrying supplies, or training Buddy. Then his father died. Thomas Walker had been a retired fire captain from Charlotte. A broad-chested man with heavy hands, a white mustache, and the kind of booming laugh that had once filled every room before lung disease slowly stole the thunder from him. He and Ryan had loved each other badly for years, both too proud to say the simple things before time made them complicated. When the hospital called near dawn, Ryan sat in his truck outside the Parker cabin for nearly an hour, staring through the windshield while Ranger rested his head against his arm. He did not know why he had driven there instead of home. Perhaps grief, like a lost dog, follows the scent of warmth. William found him just after sunrise and came out with 2 mugs of coffee. He said nothing at first. He only handed one over and sat beside him on the porch step, knees stiff, breath clouding in the cold. After a long time, Ryan said, "I should have gone sooner." William nodded. Probably. The answer was brutal and merciful because it was true. Ryan almost laughed, then covered his face with one hand. Buddy pressed against William's leg. Ranger sat beside Ryan. Between the 2 dogs, the 2 men survived the morning without needing to call it survival. From then on, Ryan stopped arriving like a rescuer and started arriving like family. He split firewood. He drove Margaret to appointments. He taught Buddy basic commands in the snowy yard while Margaret applauded every successful sit as though the puppy had graduated college. Sometimes she mistook Ryan for someone younger, someone from a year she still trusted. Once she touched his cheek and said, "You look tired, sweetheart." Ryan did not correct her. He only covered her hand with his and said, "I am, ma'am." William watched from the doorway, his face unreadable. But later he left an extra cup of coffee on the table for Ryan without a word. By late winter, the cabin no longer felt like a place waiting to be emptied. It smelled of soup, dog fur, wood smoke, and bread from Emily's bakery. Ranger tolerated Buddy's youthful foolishness with ancient patience. Buddy guarded Margaret by day and William by night. Emily brought laughter in paper bags dusted with flour. Ryan found, beneath the sagging porch roof, a place where grief did not have to stand alone. And William, who had once believed love only left marks when it departed, began to learn that sometimes love stayed, scratched at the door, shed on the rug, stole bacon from a bakery counter, and laid its warm head against the ruins until they remembered how to become a home. The last snow of winter did not fall like a storm, but like a farewell, soft and slow over Blue Ridge Hollow, melting almost as soon as it touched the porch rails. By morning, the woods behind the Parker cabin had begun to drip with thaw. Water slid from bare branches, the roof released small silver lines of snowmelt, and the narrow lane that had been buried for months showed patches of brown earth beneath the white. Inside the cabin, Margaret sat near the front window with a blue blanket across her knees and Buddy stretched beside her chair, his head resting close enough that she could touch him without looking. William stood by the stove, turning a piece of firewood in his hands, though there was already enough kindling stacked beside him. He had grown quieter in the last few weeks, not colder, only more careful, as if every word spoken too loudly might startle the fragile peace they had built. Ryan was outside checking the porch steps with Ranger lying near the door, and Emily had promised to come by after opening the bakery. It should have been an ordinary morning, the kind they had learned to treasure because ordinary had become a luxury. Then Margaret looked up and asked, "Excuse me, do you live here?" William's hand stopped over the stove. Buddy lifted his head. For a long second, nothing moved except the slow drip of melting snow outside the window. Margaret studied William with polite uncertainty, not fear, not anger, only the terrible innocence of someone searching for a name that had slipped beyond reach. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I know I should know you." William's face emptied. A month earlier, those words might have destroyed him. A year earlier, he might have shouted, slammed a door, or walked into the woods until the cold punished him for feeling too much. But Buddy rose before the silence could harden. The young German shepherd crossed the room and pressed his head firmly against William's leg, not as a puppy begging for comfort now, but as a guardian offering it. Ranger, gray-muzzled and calm by the door, opened his eyes and watched without moving, like an old soldier keeping peace after the battle had ended. William lowered one hand into Buddy's fur. His fingers trembled, but they did not retreat. He walked slowly to Margaret and crouched before her chair, ignoring the pain in his knees. "My name is William," he said, voice rough but gentle. "Most folks call me Frank. I'm your husband." Margaret blinked. "My husband?" "Yes, ma'am." He swallowed. "The lucky one, if anybody asks." She looked doubtful, then glanced down at Buddy, whose body leaned against William with absolute trust. Margaret's expression softened. "Buddy likes you." William gave a broken little laugh. "He has questionable judgment." "No," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "Buddy knows good people." And that was how she let him hold her hand, not because memory had returned like sunlight through clouds, but because love had found another road home. Ryan witnessed the end of it from the doorway and did not step inside until William nodded. Emily arrived an hour later with warm biscuits, apple butter, and news she had been carrying like a candle cupped against the wind. She set the box on the table and looked from Ryan to William to Margaret, then cleared her throat. "I've been thinking," she said. William groaned. "That's how trouble starts with you." "Good, you're learning." Ryan smiled for the first time that morning. Emily's plan had begun as a scribble on the back of a bakery receipt, a small local program connecting rescue dogs with veterans, widows, lonely seniors, and families who needed more than medicine could provide. Ryan had spent nights adding practical notes, training schedules, safety checks, volunteer lists, insurance forms, adoption partnerships. He had not said the biggest part aloud until that day. "I'm leaving active duty," he said. The room stilled again, but this time the silence carried wonder instead of fear. "You sure?" William asked. Ryan looked at Ranger, then Buddy, then Margaret's hand still resting in William's. "For the first time in a long while, yes." Emily's bakery would serve as the first meeting place until they found a real building. Ryan would train the dogs. Emily would organize volunteers, meals, paperwork, and, as William put it, unnecessary emotional ambushes. they named it the Winter Grace K9 Center, partly because Emily insisted, partly because William hated the name loudly enough to make everyone else love it. Spring came slowly after that, like an old hymn remembered one line at a time. Word spread through Asheville and the smaller mountain towns nearby. People who had passed the Parker cabin for years without stopping began arriving with lumber, tools, canned goods, and the awkward kindness of neighbors embarrassed it had taken them so long. Pastor Linda Brooks from a small white church near the highway came first. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her late 50s with warm brown eyes, silver-threaded curls, and a laugh that could make a cold room feel fed. She did not preach unless asked, but she could organize 6 volunteers, 3 casseroles, and a roof repair before noon. Beside her came Caleb Reed, a local carpenter in his 40s with sun-browned skin, a red beard, thick hands, and the quiet patience of a man who had rebuilt more broken porches than broken hearts, though he treated both with similar care. William tried to refuse the help for exactly 4 minutes. Then Margaret, perfectly lucid that afternoon, patted his arm and said, "Frank, hush. God sent hammers. Let them hammer." Even Ryan laughed at that. By April, the cabin no longer leaned so heavily into the hill. The porch steps were replaced, the windows sealed properly, a new wood stove glowed in the living room, and Emily hung yellow curtains Margaret had chosen on a good day. Buddy became the first official therapy dog of the Winter Grace K9 Center, though William insisted the title sounded like something invented by people who owned too many clipboards. Still, he showed up to every training session. At first, he stood in the back with his arms folded, pretending to supervise. Then, a Vietnam veteran named Harold cried into Buddy's neck one afternoon, and William quietly sat beside him without saying a word. After that, nobody joked about Buddy's job again. Margaret's illness did not disappear. Some mornings she still woke in another decade. Some evenings she asked where Lily had gone, and William had to lose the girl all over again with her. But the difference was that he no longer lost her alone. Ryan came by with Ranger. Emily brought bread and terrible puns. Pastor Linda brought casseroles. Caleb fixed whatever winter had loosened. Buddy stayed. Always Buddy stayed. On the first warm evening of May, golden light spilled across the repaired porch. Margaret sat in a rocking chair, humming a song from her wedding day. William sat beside her, one hand resting on Buddy's broadening shoulders. Ryan leaned against the rail with Ranger at his feet, and Emily balanced a tray of biscuits on one hip, accusing everyone of eating them before dinner. Margaret looked around at their strange little gathering and smiled. "This is a good place," she said. William looked at the porch, the dog, the friends, the woman who still found him even when memory failed. "Yes," he answered, "it finally is." And Buddy, once a puppy nearly given away in the first snow, laid his head across the old soldier's boots as spring breathed through the mountains and every lonely heart on that porch found, at last, a place to belong. Sometimes God does not send miracles with thunder, fire, or a voice from the clouds. Sometimes he sends them quietly, through a trembling puppy at a gas station, through an old soldier who learns to cry again, through a woman whose memory fades but whose heart still knows love, and through strangers who choose to stay when walking away would be easier. In our daily lives, many people around us are fighting silent battles. Aging parents, lonely homes, unpaid bills, grief that no one sees, and hearts too proud to ask for help. Maybe this story is a reminder that kindness is never small in the hands of God. A warm meal, a gentle word, a loyal dog, a visit at the right moment. These can become miracles for someone standing at the edge of despair. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from, or share the name of a person or pet who once helped you through a dark season. And if you believe stories like this still matter, please subscribe to the channel for more tales of faith, healing, and the quiet love God places in our path. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort every lonely heart, and remind you tonight that even in the coldest winter, His mercy can still find the front porch.